So if this scripture that Beth read sounds familiar to you, it's because we used it last week. And we're going to use it again next week as well. And last week we focused on verse 4. And I encouraged you to make your mantra for the week. Do you remember? Celebrate God all day, every day. Some of you look like you were trying. Let's do it. Celebrate God all day, every day. We're pitiful this morning. Lord, I think our brains are frozen or our tongues are... Okay, let's try it again. Celebrate God.
Celebrate God.
All day, every day.
All day, every day.
Oh, there we are. Okay, sometimes you just got to thaw a little bit. I get it. Well, this week I was working on my sermon and focusing on verse 8. And I was considering now, what little mantra am I going to give them this week that best describes our second core value of celebrating the arts? And I have to be honest with you. The first thing that came into my mind was garbage in, garbage out. Now, yes, you're laughing. That seems a little odd after the choir just sang one of Handel's greatest pieces ever. But I want to give you a little more something positive. But bear with me for a minute because I want you to see how I got to garbage in, garbage out. You see, I was reading during my study time this passage from Gene Peterson's Message Bible. And he paraphrases verse 8 in this way. Fill your minds and meditate on things true and noble, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly. Now you have to remember, Paul is writing this letter to the church in Philippi from prison. And no doubt that this first century Roman jail was far from beautiful. And no doubt that this first century Roman prison was not inspiring to the great evangelist spirit. And so I can't help but wonder when Paul writes these words if he wasn't trying to fill his own mind with beautiful things in order to counterbalance all the ugliness that was surrounding him. I mean, it makes sense to me that would be the case. I mean, have you ever watched a really violent movie and then you just sort of felt out of sorts the rest of the day? Or have you ever been around somebody who's just not very nice? And by the time you're done, you find yourself becoming somebody that you just don't want to be. Garbage in, garbage out. Ever eaten too much junk food and found yourself feeling really yucky? Or ever watched too much negative television and found negative and depressing stuff coming out of your own mouth too? Garbage in, garbage out. And Paul didn't want that for himself. And he certainly didn't want that for his reader, his first century reader, or for us. Have you ever been in a really bad mood where you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed? Nothing really happened, it's nobody's fault, and you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed and you're just sour. And then you get in the car and you hit just the right button on the CD player and just the right song happens to be there. Or just the right song comes on your favorite radio station. Or maybe you have the presence of mind to have a Spotify playlist for when you're in those moods. Thank you. Some of us have to have a Spotify playlist that we can plug into the Bluetooth on our car to get us out of that mess. Maybe some of you find yourself a poem, a favorite line of Emily Dickinson or Robert Frost or something that connects you, to something beautiful, to something good, and it makes you feel better. The famous painter Pablo Picasso is often quoted as saying, "Art washes away the soul, the dust of everyday life." Art washes away from the soul the dust of the everyday life. Now, some of you may think Picasso is overrated, and his paintings resemble something like your 4-year-old would finger paint. But it's not about whether you like Picasso or you prefer Monet, or whether your heart soars to the great music of Handel, or you feel most alive with a classic David Bowie tune. Regardless of the kind of art, art has the capability of drawing us closer to the divine. Art can indeed wash away the dust of our soul, wash away the stuff that makes us feel dirty and tired, the stuff that makes us feel like we need a spiritual shower. Art has the capability of making us feel something beyond what we might ordinarily feel, and can make us feel more deeply. The great artists who share their passions with us inspire us to be more fully the beloved child of God that we were each created to be. And they can inspire each of us to use our gifts to bring a little more love and beauty into the world for the very short time we have to do it. Now, too often, we think that because when we sing in the shower, we don't sound like Adele, or we don't sound like one of the great musicians in our choir, or our art won't ever hang in the Nelson, so why bother? Or we say, "Oh, I'm not very creative." Some of you may have heard me say that I was in the bathroom when God was handing out arts and crafts skills. But it seems that there is something deep inside people that longs to celebrate the arts, to be creative, to make something beautiful. Sometimes we just have to rethink what that means. My Ryan says that his creative outlet is cooking. The recipe is just, sort of there, and maybe he uses it and maybe he doesn't, but the spices are his creative colorings in the canvas of feeding not only our bellies, but our souls in our house. I saw on my Facebook just yesterday some of my girlfriends attending what's called a wine and design class. Have you seen these classes? Sort of a girls' night out where it's a BYOB thing. And you show up to this artist's studio and he or she helps you to create this beautiful painting or a sculpture, a piece of pottery, or something. Apparently they're very popular, but they tend to be on Saturday nights, therefore I don't go. And it's also why Amazon was reporting that one of the top-selling Christmas gifts under $25 were adult coloring books. Some of you are nodding. Maybe you got one, maybe you bought one. 5 of the top 15 best-selling books from Amazon over Christmas were adult coloring books. There is this longing to create something beautiful, to be creative, to connect us with the divine and draw us out of the ordinary of the day. Now, I have to say, I never really thought about celebrating the arts as having real practical application. I usually think about it as inspiring beauty and wonder and a time away from whatever I'm doing to think about something beautiful and good. But this week, I thought it was interesting that New York Times columnist David Brooks was thinking about the same topic that I was. Now, maybe David Brooks is reading our newsletter and knew it was on my agenda, or maybe it was just something in the universe. He wrote an editorial in Friday's New York Times entitled, "When Beauty Strikes." It's a tremendous article, and I commend it to you. And some of you I know have already read it because you sent it to me as well. And at the very end of the article, he gives a practical application to why art and beauty can and should really matter to us. Now, maybe he was thinking about it being the Martin Luther King holiday weekend because he moves the conversation for us from simply celebrating the arts to doing justice. And in case you're not familiar, that's next week's sermon in our number 3 on the core values. Jamaica Partners folks will get you the CD or the podcast for it. And David Brooks writes, if true racial reconciliation is achieved in this country, it will be through the kind of deep spiritual and emotional understanding that art can foster. You can change the world by changing people's thoughts and imaginations. And David Brooks isn't the only one who apparently thinks that arts can change the world. Immediately after reading that article, I thought about artist and activist George Takei. Some of you are thinking George Takei until you see his picture and you remember him from Star Trek. Well, George, if you haven't heard, has produced a Broadway musical called Allegiance. And it is based on his family's story of the Japanese internment camps here in this country during the 1940s. And George, after hearing a certain presidential candidate suggest he might have supported such camps, has reserved a theater seat at every performance of his show for a prominent New Yorker turned White House hopeful. That's a lot of hope. And he hasn't come. And I heard George on NPR this week saying, but I'm hopeful. George Takei believes that his art can change people's thoughts and imaginations and maybe even their hearts and maybe even their politics by giving people a new perspective through a non-threatening medium like the theater. Just like John Lennon must have hoped that with songs like Imagine or Happy Christmas, the war is over, that some small bit of someone's thought or mind or heart might be changed. Or like the beautiful giant statue that rises above the New York harbor is an artistic symbol of our values, pointing us upward to the heavens to remind us that everyone is welcome and that we constantly are encouraged to love the other. It's why books like To Kill a Mockingbird stand the test of time and can speak to issues of justice the way debates and political conversations and marches just can't do. Well, now you've seen that I'm into next Sunday's sermon, aren't I? Art. When we celebrate the arts, my friends, it can draw us so much closer to God and bring more beauty and love into the world. And when we celebrate the arts, not just as a core value, but again, a way of life, we do as Paul challenges us to do. We fill our minds on beautiful things, on wonderful things, the best of things, So this week I encourage you to listen for God in a piece of music that will wash away the dust of your day. Maybe even create something beautiful and quiet your busy mind with a coloring page mandala that connects you more deeply to the divine creator of the universe. So I said I wanted to give you something more positive than garbage in, garbage out. Although at this point you'll probably remember garbage in, garbage out more than you will anything else. But I couldn't help but think by the time I got done with my sermon this week of a meditative line from a meditation practice. Breathe in, beauty in. Breathing out, love out. Beauty in, love out. Beauty in, love out. My friends, my prayer for us this week is that we will celebrate God with the arts all day, every day. And maybe on this weekend where we honor Dr. King, that we might not just celebrate the arts as a way of life, but a way of love, changing the world, one piece of music at a time. May it be so. Amen.